The calls for complete political reform in Lebanon are growing louder and louder after the Beirut port explosion that killed at least 158 people. Lebanon's information minister has become the first senior member of government to resign since it happened on Tuesday. Manal Abdel Samad says there's little hope for change. 6 MPs have now resigned, and the most powerful Christian leader, Maronite patriarch Bashar Boutros al-Rai, is urging the whole cabinet to quit. The political upheaval comes after mass protests blaming the government and corruption for the blast. The demonstrations descended into hours of street battles with security forces on Saturday. The igniting of 2,700 tons of explosive ammonium nitrate caused billions of dollars of damage in just a few seconds. A virtual donors conference seeking to raise money for a rebuild will begin in just under 2 hours from now. It's being hosted by France and the UN. Let's join Zeina Khodr now. She's live for us in Beirut. So, Zeina, the information minister resigning, this off the back of 5 other MPs. How significant is this for the government?
Well, she is the most senior government official to resign since Tuesday's blast. There are reports suggesting that other ministers may tender their resignation later today, but so far it's unconfirmed. Significant? Well, it's symbolic. You're going to need 7 ministers to resign for this government to be toppled. That's a third plus 1. This is a 20-member government. The government is under a lot of pressure. People are angry. I'll just show you what's going on behind us. People are coming to get bread and to get medicine. They tell us there is no government, there is no state. We have to rely on NGOs, on civil society groups in order to survive. This is a cash-strapped government. The state is near bankruptcy. And last night, the Prime Minister, Hassan Diab, addressed the nation. Many were hopeful that he would announce his resignation. Instead, he proposed a way out of the crisis by holding early elections. But he also asked for a 2-month timetable in order to do that. So some believe that the Prime Minister is trying to buy time, and many believe that behind the scenes there are negotiations to reach some sort of a political deal. When the French president visited Lebanon a few days ago, he made it very clear that there is a political initiative on the table. And he was not just speaking on behalf of France. Many believe he was speaking on behalf of the West. So the international community really involved in the Lebanon crisis at the time being. It's not clear how much pressure they can put on the ruling elite to change their ways and to cave in and make concessions to the people, because what the people want is a new leadership. What the people want is a leadership that's not corrupt and a leadership that can provide them with at least basic services.
This is the point of no return. People are starving. The economy is deteriorated. The economic crisis is heightening. Our families, children, friends have just been left behind. Fear and disappointment lives within them. In this fateful moment, we cannot just sit behind. We have to stand in dignity together as a nation. I feel that I need to send an apology to the Lebanese people because we failed to achieve their ambitions due to the difficulties. I have worked with my colleagues in the cabinet according to the directions of the Prime Minister, who is following all the details with a lot of wisdom in order to respond to the demands of the people. But no way does the reality go parallel with the ambitions after the Beirut earthquake that has shaken the nation. And due to the displaced, the martyrs, those who are still hungry, I respect all of this and I submit my resignation to the government, and I wish all the best to Lebanon in stability and unity. Long live Lebanon.
And Zeina, what strength do those words by the Christian Maronite patriarch hold for the government to resign if it can't help Lebanon?
Well, the Maronite patriarch is an influential figure in Lebanon. In fact, he has been leading a campaign trying to convince the government the best way forward is to resign. The best way forward is to disassociate Lebanon from regional conflicts. So the Maronite patriarch is considered to be part of the opposition camp. They believe the ruling governing alliance, which is led by Hezbollah, a group that doesn't hide its links with Iran, They believe that Hezbollah is responsible for Lebanon's isolation because it has fighters in Syria and across the Middle East. And they believe it is because of Hezbollah's policies in the region that led to Lebanon's isolation. Hezbollah is under U.S. sanctions. The Gulf Arabs also call it a terrorist organization. So what he's trying to say is that Lebanon needs to go back to its traditional allies, the West, the Arab world, countries that used to support this country. Because currently, the government is considered belonging to the Iranian-Syrian axis in the region. And ever since Hassan Diab took office in January, it has been isolated. No Western or Arab country visited the government or welcomed the government. So the Maronite patriarch, undoubtedly influential, his voice will be heard in the West, no doubt, and among many people in Lebanon as well.
And Zeina, the streets behind you, they're looking calm in stark contrast to yesterday's street battles. What do we know of more protests perhaps later today?
Some activists are talking about the possibility of further protests. You talked about last night running battles in the streets of Beirut. We've seen scenes like that in recent months, ever since a protest movement began in October demanding a new leadership. But yesterday, the anger was very palpable. People demanding justice, revenge. For them, it's just not enough for a new leadership. What they want is those in power to be held accountable for Tuesday's blast. They believe negligence, incompetence, corruption. That is why thousands of tons of explosive material was stored at Beirut port for years, and nobody did anything about it. And the Beirut port is located in a city, in a densely populated city. So people are demanding justice. They want an independent investigation. They don't believe the government-led inquiry into the disaster will give the required results. They believe that there will be some sort of a cover-up. That's the feeling in the streets. So let's have a look at the scenes yesterday in central Beirut.
They stood their ground in the face of power. Relentless tear gas by security forces, at times live ammunition. But protesters didn't leave. Too angry at a political class they blame for Tuesday's blast that killed dozens and destroyed and damaged many neighborhoods in the Lebanese capital. The authorities were aware that thousands of tons of highly explosive material was stored at the Beirut port for years.
We have survived the explosion, but part of all of us has died, to be honest. But what can we do? I am one of the fortunate ones who can leave and establish myself outside, but all these people cannot. So what can we do?
What they did was return to the streets. They have been demanding a new leadership for months. Many were injured in running battles that lasted for hours. But this time, they say they won't be silenced. They want justice and revenge for the victims of the explosion and believe a government-led inquiry into the disaster won't hold senior officials accountable.
We are not leaving. It's either them or us in this country. And you know what? The people always prevails, and we will fight.
We want revenge, and our revenge is by putting all the political class either on the hanging stools you see over there or in the dustbins, but we want them out.
Protesters also stormed 3 ministries. State institutions, people say, are run by corrupt politicians who they blame for draining the state's treasury. They say they want a state and a competent government. Currently, Lebanon's institutions are controlled by political parties, and there is a parallel state run by the Iranian-backed Hezbollah. The Prime Minister Hassan Diab, who took office early this year, is now offering a way out of the crisis.
We cannot face these problems unless we have early elections, to elect new politicians and a new parliament. We need a new political elite and a new parliament. We need to work together to overcome this difficult period. We know, and I know, that people have questions about the catastrophe and how the government plans to handle it. The catastrophe is way bigger than anyone could imagine. The impact may stay forever.
Early elections have been one of the opposition's demands, but there are concerns. The sectarian-based political system and electoral law won't give independent candidates a chance.
The early elections is a good step, but I'm afraid that the political parties they still have the power over the people, and it's all about the system. Like, I'm afraid that we will have the same people again.
It's not the first time central Beirut turns into a battleground between the people and the establishment. The struggle for change is not new. The anger has been building for years.
Many feel those in power caved in by proposing early elections. The governing alliance is not just facing pressure from the street. The state is nearly bankrupt, and the international community won't help unless politicians fight state corruption. For now, many people here feel they won a round in what is likely to be a long battle. Zeina, Khodr, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Ibrahim Halawi is a member of the opposition group MMFD. He also is a teaching fellow at Royal Holloway University of London. Joins us now via Skype. So we've had 6 MPs resign since the blast, the information minister being the most senior and the foreign minister resigning before the blast. Is this the downfall of the government that the protesters were calling for?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first step, I think, but it's fair to say that we as a society, as people, were still shocked and astonished at the magnitude and the size of this disaster. And it's not an accident by any measure. So I think the resignation, the trend now is mass resignation, but that is not necessarily the answer to the crisis. It might be a way for the sectarian parties and their entourage in the parliament and the state institutions to really kind of allow the people to blow up some steam so that they can reduce the anger, the mass anger, and then reproduce their grip on power. So resignation itself is not really an answer. We have to be able to be part as a people, organized as part of the transitional process into something less criminal.
And so this call from the Prime Minister on Saturday to give him 2 months to sort this out, he'll hold early elections, does that not also pacify what the protesters want?
Not really. And this is also not just our stance as citizens in a state party. It's also the stance of every other opposition group. We do believe that early elections is not really the answer because the regime, the power-sharing arrangement, which kept these sectarian parties in power for decades, they are the ones that have the authority in dictating the rules of the elections. And therefore, they have the ability to devise the electoral law that would ensure the reproduction of the same regime. So elections itself is not an answer when our assessment is the state itself has collapsed. And therefore, what we believe is the answer is to decide together with the ruling parties on a transitional process that can save society when we are in the midst of overlapping and emergent and urgent crises, be it fiscal or economic, or now, as we can see, also humanitarian.
So this sectarian power-sharing agreement, I mean, it was put in place, wasn't it, after the Civil War to keep the peace. Do you believe that it's now outdated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was put in place after the war, but it was meant to be temporary. Even the Taif agreement, which is basically the peace agreement between the warlords who were turned now into statesmen, it was meant to give them temporary sectarian arrangement that would then prepare for the emergence of a civil state. That second part did not happen, and therefore they were able to extend and sustain a very corrupt and clientelistic sectarian network. So yes, this is outdated, but the question now, and this is where we are really concerned as opposition groups and also from an academic perspective, is that France and the US seem to be proactively trying to contain the crisis. And what they are presenting is not really the establishment of a civil state, but something that would allow these sectarian parties to sustain their grip on society, albeit in some sort of more passive manner that can avoid future disasters like the one we've seen in the past 3 days.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the international help and how much Lebanon needs it, or how can it achieve what you're asking for, what you're demanding, without any international help? Who does take the reins?
Yeah, that's the dilemma of politics, unfortunately. On one hand, we do need help. Society at large needs help. And it is very much commendable that states that would be providing this help are suggesting that this can be done directly to society rather than going through the channels, the very corrupt channels of the state. This is something that, at least on the short term, is much needed. However, we cannot really rely on states, be it regional or international, to give us that sort of sustainable solution, which is the formation of a civil state, which every society really needs at the end of the way. And that's why we think that the solution has to come from the people. Unfortunately, the society at large is still very much divided, and sectarian parties have a large stake in how communities perceive the crisis and where the blame game basically, how is it framed, how the blame game is framed.
Ibrahim Halawi, many thanks for taking the time to join us there from London. Ibrahim Halawi, member of the opposition group MMFD.